Welcome back to the Triathlon Show, John. How are you doing?
Good, good. I'm glad to be back.
Are you tired? I'm guessing that the last few days have been quite busy with the launch of your new book.
Yes, it's been a few late nights making sure everything is lined up on the website, and then early mornings checking my email and getting back to people. But super super exciting. I've been working on the book for over 2 years now, so it's
Yeah,
really good to
you
get
can
it out.
you can tell I have I guess what is it, a preprint version of it, and it's a beast of a book. So it's clear that it took some time. Um, just at the top here, can you introduce what is the name of the book and where can listeners find it and what can they expect from it?
Yeah, the book is called Marathon Excellence for Everyone. You could find it at marathonexcellence.com or it's on Amazon. And simply, this is the comprehensive guide to modern marathon training and racing. So it's got training plans. It has a high level training philosophy. It has race day plans, how to set up for fueling, all of the science behind why to train the way I say you should train, citing scientific papers published as recently as a few months ago. And then also advanced training techniques that people may have heard of, like heat training, special blocks, double threshold. So it is meant to be a comprehensive evidence-based guide to the marathon.
Yeah, and having had just a couple of hours to look into it and mainly going through the table of contents and some training plans, it does look to me like it really is that. I remember actually my entry into endurance sports was through mainly marathon running and the big main main works that I was drawing on in the early days were Pete Fitzinger and Jack Daniels and I remember that I found those books to be incredible and really comprehensive. But I think that now, if you get into endurance sports today or into marathon running specifically today, this would be an even more comprehensive book and I guess updated because it's newer than and would include newer science and things like that. So yeah, I think listeners can check it out if you're interested. I think it looks like a great book and I'm excited to read it. But let's move into a training discussion then and discuss how to prepare for marathons. I'm sure there are a lot of people that have those coming up because it is that time of year. And let's start with very broad principles. What would you say are your key principles of marathon training to keep in mind?
Yeah, at a high level, I think there's maybe like five principles you should keep in mind. The first is just that, and this shouldn't be surprising to anybody following your show. Marathon fitness, like any other kind of fitness, it has specific physiological roots. So there's things that people probably heard about, VO2 max, running economy, a couple other things that are like underpinning marathon performance. There's a lot more that goes into a good marathon than just having really impressive numbers on some lab test. But at the end of the day, there's like physiological roots underneath your marathon performance, and your training does need to address those. And then number two, training is specific. So if you want to run well in the marathon, you need to do workouts that are specific to the demands of the race. So that means long, fast running at speeds relatively close to marathon pace. Just the same as any other sport, right? If you want to get better at cycling, you got to ride the bike. And if you want to ride the bike for a certain duration, your training should reflect the specific demands of the event, right? Sprint, triathlon, Ironman, it's going to look different. And then third, and pretty different from previous training approaches, I believe every speed has a place in training. I'm not a big believer in like, oh, you just do these one or two magic speeds and then you're set. I think you want to use the full spectrum, the full percentage of speeds, both faster and slower than the speed you want to run. And how much of each speed to use is where periodization comes from. So it's more like shifting your emphasis throughout the season versus I'm just doing base training, so I'm only running easy, and I'm just doing race pace training, so I'm only running marathon pace. You want to use a full spectrum of speeds throughout the season. And then fourth, not surprising to anybody who follows any kind of endurance sport, is that improvement comes from stress and then recovery. So getting back to specific training, like if you do a long, fast workout at speeds that are really close to marathon pace, that's a big stress. You need a bigger recovery. So you can't just train hard all the time. You need big stress and big recovery. And then lastly, more pragmatically, I just don't think good marathons happen by accident. I think you need a plan. I think you need to get your strategy for the course dialed in, your fueling dialed in, even your mental approach. And when you look at people who have success in the marathon, whether that's just somebody breaking 3 hours or a professional, they generally have a plan and they know how they're going to approach race day. So I wanted to include all of those 5 principles in a streamlined way in the book.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense, and we'll definitely get into quite a bit more detail on at least some of those through the rest of the questions. Actually, already starting with the next question I wanted to ask, which is about periodization, which you alluded to there with introducing or including the broad spectrum of speeds. So can you talk more about that? How do you do that specifically when preparing for a marathon?
Yeah, there's 2 ways to think about periodization, and they both lead to the same place. The first way is to think about it in terms of addressing those physiological roots of performance. So if you want to think about it, you could think of marathon performance as basically like VO2 max multiplied by running economy, multiplied by your steady state max, which is associated with things like threshold, multiplied by...
just to clarify, that was what I was going to say, that because some listeners may not be familiar with the term steady state max, but you basically refer to threshold in that way, or if you want to be a bit more sciencey, I guess fractional utilization of VO2 max at race pace would be the term.
Yeah, and the reason I say that term in particular is because just a term like threshold, that's just, and I'm talking about LT2 here, that's just one way of estimating what's somebody's highest steady state that they can reach. There's also critical speed. There's also maximal lactate steady state. These are all different measurements trying to get at the same underlying thing, which is that steady state max. So just like with like core temperature, you might, there's various kinds of like thermometers and tests you can do to try to estimate someone's core temperature. And they have different strengths and weaknesses and accuracies. Same thing, right? An LT2 test is pretty good, pretty quick, pretty cheap, but it's not the gold standard. Critical speed testing or maximal lactate steady state testing are generally considered to be the gold standards, depending on who you ask. So yeah, that's basically what percentage of your VO2 max can you actually sustain at a steady state over time? Because just a high VO2 max is, it's nice, but if you look at the best marathoners in the world, they're actually not the runners with the highest VO2 max, but they are the runners with the highest percentage of their VO2 max that they can maintain a steady state over time. So VO2 max, run economy, steady state max. And then this property called physiological resilience, which is basically quantified as what's your marathon pace as a percentage of your steady state max. But it basically means, can your body maintain its baseline level of fitness over time? So at 30, 35K into the marathon, is your body still holding up, or are you deteriorating? Is your effective VO2 max going down? Is your effective running economy going down? So you can think about, getting back to your question, periodization. Okay, the first thing we need to do is start addressing those physiological roots of performance. And then once we have that foundation, we can use that to build on with our specific work that's focused on, okay, well, we got to run 42K as fast as possible. That dictates particular long, fast workouts. That's the first way of looking at it. The other way of looking at periodization is start at the end. Okay, well, I'm going to try to run the marathon, 26.2 miles or 42K, as fast as I can. That dictates some specific workouts, say 32K at 90 to 95% of marathon pace. That's a pretty big workout, right? Okay, so I can't just start doing that workout out of nowhere. So I have to work backwards from there. Can I do marathon supportive training that supports my ability to do long, fast runs at 90 to 95% of marathon pace, long repeats at marathon pace, alternating kilometers at 105% of marathon pace, and then only slowing down to 90% of marathon pace for the next one? How do I build out a base of support to be able to do those specific workouts? Well, that's supportive training. And then underneath that, how do I become able to do the supportive workouts, which would be like 90 and 110% of marathon pace, kind of moving out slower and faster from marathon pace? Then you get to general training, which is a very broad spectrum of speeds, very easy, moderate, strong, fast, all the way from very easy up to 5K pace or so. So that's another way of working backwards and ending up at basically the same thing. Because when you look into the research on the physiology side, what you find is that these different systems of the body, like VO2 max, running economy, steady state max, resilience, they have different like individual subcomponents, which are most appropriately targeted by different intensities. So something to build up just the basic structural integrity of your body is not the thing that's most optimal for mitochondrial density or for mitochondrial respiratory power. Those are different things. You need a different stimulus and training to optimize them. And so with both either this like sort of starting from science or starting from the demands of the race, you actually end up at pretty much the same place, which is a general phase where you work a broad spectrum of speeds, work on the foundational aspects of fitness, a marathon supportive phase where you work on speeds that are 90 to 110% of marathon pace. So marathon pace plus or minus 10%, and then marathon specific work, which is more focused on 95, 100, 105%, the most specific speeds for the race.
Yeah. Just to put some things into context for listeners, when we talk about using percentages of marathon pace, for example, 90% or 110%, just making the math simple here, somebody is going to run 4 minutes per kilometer. What is that in miles? That would be something like...
That's like 620 pace or so.
Yeah, so that results in a 250 marathon, 249, something like that. So a pretty fast marathon. If you take 90% of that, then you're running at 424, so 240 seconds plus 10%. Or if you take 110% of that, you're running at 336. So basically, those are still pretty 90% to 110%. If you just think about the percentages, it sounds pretty close, but when you actually do the math on it, it's still a pretty broad spectrum, even in that marathon supportive phase. Like you could argue that somebody who's running a 249 roughly marathon, that 90% of marathon pace is probably a little bit easier than LT1 for them, and that the 110% is that could be around critical speed for them most likely. So
another good way to get intuitions about these percentages is every 5% increase is cuts the race distance you can go in half. So if marathon pace is 100%, 105% of marathon pace for an average runner is about half marathon pace. 110% is about 10K pace. And then it's a little bit, depends. It's more variable when you really get far out, but 112, 115% is about 5K pace. And you can do the same thing in reverse.
Yeah.
So that's and by the way, the book has a chart, and I have a free web app for calculating percentages. If you just search pace percentage calculator, it's the first thing that comes up. So you don't have to be there sitting there with a calculator and pencil doing the math yourself.
Yeah. So, but basically, what that means then is that what you're saying is really when we're in that early phase, we're doing when we're doing like the higher intensity, well above 110%, that we're really into that VO2 max territory, and on the low side, we're just doing kind of more like easy base work. And then when we get into that supportive phase, doing a lot of 90% work and 110% work and around those sort of intensities, we're really like focusing on that heavy domain, the top and the bottom end of the heavy domain, and then we're moving to that very specific marathon pace in the final stages of the periodization. And I guess it's fair to say, I mean, I'm sure he was also not the first, but one person who is very famous for this is Renato Canova, right? So for people that might want to have that reference as well, or that context.
Yes. This is a very, very strongly influenced by Canova. And then also there's kind of this Italian school of marathon training. So the people who coached like Gilindo Bordin, who won Olympic gold medal, and Stefano Baldini, who also won Olympic gold medal in the marathon. This is like very classic Italian style periodization. Canova was kind enough to provide an endorsement for the book. So that was really great. I don't want to say this is like Canova training, like, it's maybe Canova style, but Canova himself presumably would do some things differently. But he had some very nice things to say about the book. So I was very happy to see that.
Yeah, that's pretty big to get praise from Canova. Is there anything else about the periodization, or maybe we'll just move into the actual where the rubber meets the road, how to create a training plan for a marathon, and talk a bit more about the practical aspects of what that looks like? Or do you want to mention something else before?
I think when we talk about that, some of the questions people will have might be clear when we start talking about actual like training structure.
Yeah. So maybe let's start here. I don't even have it in our question sheet, but can you give some specific workouts, typical workouts for the different phases and using different intensities?
Yeah, I think the most productive way to think about it would be working backwards from like the marathon specific phase, because that's how I lay out plans. It's like, I'm like, okay, race day is 18 weeks out from today. Let's start zooming out and going in reverse. So you have your race at the end of the plan, and you've got a taper of a week and a half, 2 weeks. And then you ask, okay, what are the biggest, most important workouts that I'm going to do? So for somebody doing 100 and 110K a week, just as an example, that might be 32K at 95% of marathon pace, about a month out. And then 3 weeks out, something like maybe 5 sets of 4K at marathon pace, 1K at 85 to 90%. So alternating between 4K at race pace and then a 1K float, and then 4, 1, 4, 1. So you do those 2 workouts, and if those 2 workouts can be like pretty much on point for like you said earlier, let's say 4 minutes per K is your target pace. You can do 32K at 4:24, and then you do that 1K 4K workout at 4 minutes. 95% would be 4:12.
Yeah.
So 32K, 4:12, and then 5 sets of 4K at 4 minutes per K, 1K in 4:24. You do those 2 workouts, you recover well afterwards. Like, honestly, 4 minutes per K is in the bag for the marathon. Like, that's, you're good. So the question is, all right, like, let's work backwards from those workouts. Both of them are you don't just do 32K, 95% marathon pace. Like, I don't know where that, you need to build up to it. So, okay, well, working backwards, we can, maybe a few weeks, 2 weeks before that, we'll do 29K, 28K. A few weeks before that, we'll do, 25K at the same speed. Or we can do something like, maybe instead we'll do like 25K in 5K chunks, working from 90 to 95%. So not the whole thing at 95%, but, maybe 90 and then 92 and then 94 and then 96 in 4 chunks like that. And then before, a few weeks before that, you might do 25K, just 90% the whole time. And then before that, maybe 22K or 21K, 90%. And you can do a similar working backwards strategy with that 4K, 1K workout. So maybe you do the same volume of 25 kilometers, but you do it as 3K, 1K instead of 4K, 1K. And then a few weeks before that, you do 2K, 1K. And then maybe your first workout is like 1K marathon pace, 1K, 85, 90%. So you work backwards like that. And then you start building in, okay, well, if I'm doing like 195%, I also need to do that 105% and some 110% work backwards from there. So that's how the plan comes together. And then when you look at it from the beginning, what it looks like is, okay, I'm going to start out at like pretty reasonable mileage for what I'm doing right now. And then, a distribution of workouts that's relatively kind of flat within the week. So none of the workouts are super tough. You don't need a bunch of recovery after them. And they span a broad range of speeds. So you're doing things like progression runs, like 8x2 minutes at about 5K pace, long, easy run through hills. So stuff that looks like a lot like classic threshold work, like 7x3 minutes at 90% of 5K pace. Do that for a few weeks. That's your general training. And then you progress into a little bit more of a I almost want to use the word polarized, but that's not. I know that means something to a lot of people. That's not what I mean. So maybe we'll use the Canova term of modulation, where you have a bigger workout and then more recovery afterwards. Maybe moving from 3 workouts a week to just 2. So you have a bigger stress and a bigger recovery, and then in this marathon supportive phase, you're doing closer to that, like 90 and 110%, with some work at 95 and 100 and 105% of marathon pace too. It's not like we only do 90% and 110% and nothing in the middle and nothing outside that. Like I said earlier, it's about shifting the emphasis. Those workouts get longer, faster.
Question on that, John. So, in practice, how do you try to basically work in when you want to get that little bit of work at marathon pace in that supportive phase, or a little bit of faster work, let's say 115%, or 115%, or the faster work that you had been doing in the previous phase, in general phase? Are you doing that as short little pieces in the workouts that you're already doing that have an abundance of work at, let's say, 90% and 110%? Or do you dedicate basically a separate workout every few weeks within that phase? What does that look like for you?
So I actually use a mixture of both of those strategies. So sometimes I'll incorporate workouts into and you can see this in the plans. Some workouts will incorporate things like some work at 108% and some work at 112%, like maybe like a 2K and then a 1K and then a 2K and a 1K. Kind of mix in a little bit of like some of that kind of 10K pace and then a little bit of that more general phase 5K pace. And then sometimes we'll just continue doing a full workout at that's kind of a progression from the stuff we were doing earlier, but you do it less often. So it's like the workout is on a cycle and that cycle gets longer. So instead of running a 5K-ish pace every 2 weeks or every 10 days, you might only do it every 20 days in the supportive phase. Yep. So you sequence it so it's less often.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking is especially when you're going from maybe 3 workouts a week to 2, then it becomes harder to actually manage to fit everything in if you only commit a dedicated workout to those intensities that you kind of are not focusing on so much anymore. But yeah, if you use a combination of that and also working it into the workouts that focus more on your the main area of intensity that you're currently working on, then I can see how that will still work quite nicely.
Yeah, and I think that requirement is actually where periodization comes from. It's why you need to do it. Because you might ask, like, why not just do specific training all the time? And the reason is exactly what you're getting at, which is that the more you focus on the race-specific work, the further away you get from that foundational aspects of fitness. And you can only do that for so long. It's kind of, I have this sort of metaphor of specific workouts being like a cliff that juts out from a mountain. I don't know if this is like geologically accurate, but the bigger the mountain, the bigger your base, the further out your cliff of specific fitness can go. But if you go out too far, you go off the edge. So you need a big base for specific work. And the bigger your base is, meaning like higher mileage, more experienced, the longer you can do that specific training. So what you'll notice if you look at the training schedules, that the lowest volume plan, it's called Breeze, that the plans all have wind themes. So it's Breeze, Wind, Gale, Tornado, Hurricane are the 5 plans in the book. Breeze, the lowest mileage plan, the marathon specific and supportive phases are very short and the general phase is very long. Whereas in Tornado or Hurricane, the highest volume plans, the specific and supportive phases are much longer. Because the more experience you are and the more mileage you do, the bigger your base is, the more time you can spend doing that marathon specific work before your basic foundational fitness deteriorates and you have to go back to the beginning.
Yeah, but that makes total sense. That's also how I think about specific training. I've been known to say sometimes that specificity is at times overrated, and I'm not as sure if that is still the case in running. But in triathlon, I do think that is a bit of a trend and especially when it comes to the really long races, even a half Ironman for most people takes 4 hours or longer, but for a lot of people it takes way longer, 6 hours, 7 hours. An Ironman easily for most people 10 hours, 10 to 15 hours, and what happens if you do a lot of specific training for those sorts of distances is that you end up getting quite slow because you're just doing relatively slow training. So, but then if you look at the way that professional athletes are training that are doing those races at high intensities, they can do quite a lot of specificity because of what you said, that they have a massive base, but also they are close to their genetic potential in those biological or physiological factors that you mentioned, VO2 max threshold, or steady state max, and economy. So, well, at least in terms of the VO2 max and the threshold aspects, I think that when you're quite close to your maximum, that affords you the ability to do a lot of specific training and benefit from it. But when you're far from your genetic potential in those factors, then yes, you need some specificity, whatever race you're training for, but it's not as important as just improving those basic physiological factors for most races.
Yeah, there's like a mathematical way of thinking about that, which is that like if you think of that like physiological resilience or that durability component as a percentage, you can you get bigger benefits out of like a 1 percentage point increase in that if your absolute numbers, if you're running economy and if your VO2 max are better, because like as the absolute number goes up, each 1 percentage point increase in like how close to your highest steady state can you sustain for a marathon, say, you actually get like more gain out of that. So I definitely agree, and that's why the higher mileage plans have more specific training and the lower mileage plans have less specific training. And maybe another thing to highlight that we've kind of touched on briefly, but is the notion that for the marathon, and I think also for longer events in general, your things that most people consider speed are actually your base. So you kind of start from speed and then you take the speed and you go longer, which is an inversion of how people would usually think about like 5K training. Oh, base training, I'm going to go do a bunch of mileage and I'm going to go do a bunch of specific speed work for the event. Marathon, completely the opposite, where it's basically you're almost like starting from 5K training and then making the speeds longer, as opposed to starting from tons of slow, easy running and nothing else.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that, the traditional concept of base training, I mean, it's been around for so long, for 100 years or more or less. But I mean, it comes from a lot of Olympic sports. Okay, the marathon was in the Olympics from early on, but it was the only Olympic endurance event that was very long. And then if you compare that to something like the 5,000 meters or the 1,500 and all of those things, like Lydiard's runners were doing 1,500, they were doing 800, they were doing 5,000. So yeah, then it does make sense that the base training becomes what it is, with more of that kind of longer stuff and less of the speed stuff. But then it does need to shift on its head a bit when we talk about these longer events. But the way of thinking about it has not necessarily shifted, at least not in all circles. So I do agree with that.
Yeah, and that's something I'm trying to change with this book, is to get people to think about the marathon as not as like a test of endurance, but as like a race you can train for. The Lydiard example is interesting. You go back and look at like what Peter Snell was running back in the 60s. His times would still be world class today. He ran like 144 in the 800, like on grass with spikes in the 60s, which is like, that would be, he'd be running 142 or 141 today. But if you look at what people were running in the marathon back then, it was much, much, much slower. Slower than like women's world record today, or like elite women's times around the world today. So the approach to the marathon has changed, and you can see this by looking at like the one example Canova uses is the ratio of marathon to 10K time world records, or look up your area records for your own country. You'll see this like convergence where marathoners are getting faster, even relative to the ability of 5K, 10K, 1,500 runners. And I think that's because training uses this starting from speed approach now.
Yeah. I think there are some other factors as well. Like I think probably super shoes when you do a lot of long runs help, and nutrition probably help more in the marathon or marathon training than 10K training. But I agree that that's probably one big factor. One thing that also relates to the training plans that I wanted to ask about is the mileage and mileage progressions. First of all, how should people think about what is the right mileage for them to do when they're training for a marathon? And then secondly, if you know where you want to start or where you want to end, I don't know how you approach that, but how do you think about the progression throughout your plan and your training towards the marathon?
Yeah, I wanted to design the plans so that they're connected to each other, that they're not just like completely separate, disparate versions. But also not just like scaling up the same thing. I talked earlier about how the Breeze plan, the lowest mileage plan, has a much longer general phase. I don't think the 100-mile-a-week plan should just be the 50-mile-a-week plan times 2. I think you need to scale it more intelligently. So the plans are kind of connected to each other, and each plan has an 18-week version and a 12-week version that you can do. The 18-week version is kind of like the flagship version, and then the 12-week is compressed because I realize, I would prefer people take 18 weeks to train for marathon, but I understand it's not always possible. And then each plan has a low-end mileage and a high-end mileage. So the Breeze plan, for example, you can do it peaking at 40 miles a week or peaking at 50 miles a week. I think I don't have the kilometers in front of me, but I think that's like 65 and 80, something like that.
65 to 80, yeah, I think something like that. Yeah.
So, and to answer your first question, the right mileage to run is the volume that you're going to be able to successfully complete without getting yourself injured or being completely burning out. But that number can change and increase over time. So I wanted to design the plan. So, okay, maybe you're like, I can only do 40 miles a week. Now I don't, maybe I'm running 25 or 30 right now. I've done 40 a couple times. I think I can do that. Okay, you can do the Breeze plan and you can peak at 40 miles a week. And then the next time you train for a marathon, you do the same plan with the same workouts, but a little bit more mileage, peaking at the high end at 50 miles a week. You grow, become stronger, and then the next time around, you can do the Wind plan, which is 55 or 65, and then more sophisticated workouts accordingly. Then there's the Gale plan, 70 to 80, Tornado, 85 to 90, and then if you're really intense, high level, there's the Hurricane plan, which is 100, 110, or 120 miles a week. So really spanning, that's a 3x range of mileage. So obviously, like to some extent, more is better with many, many caveats. But again, the right number is what you're going to be able to do right now. So I think people are often too ambitious with what their mileage is going to be in the short term, and then they're not ambitious enough, like 2, 3, 4 years down the road.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see here. And related to this question about the mileage on a weekly basis, what about the mileage of the long run? How do you think about that? Sorry, getting back to the weekly basis. The other thing that I want to ask is, okay, if you know that you're going to peak at 40 miles at some point in the plan, that might be 3 weeks out or 4 weeks out from the race. How do you build up to that? What is the philosophy on how quickly to ramp up mileage? How long do you stay at your peak mileage in the marathon training build?
So based on some of the research that's come out of there's the whole group of, but basically like epidemiologists who look at running injuries, and they found that this idea of like the 10% rule is not really well founded in the data they've seen. But some things that do seem to be more relevant for reducing injury risk are things like taking a down week every 3 or 4 weeks, not having drastic spikes in either your total mileage or the length of any individual run, which is why you don't just do 20-mile runs out of nowhere. So the buildup I recommend in general for most people is 3 weeks up and then 1 week a little bit down. 3 weeks up, 1 week a little bit down. And then reaching peak mileage in that marathon supportive phase. Now, one thing that's a little bit different from how people may have trained for the marathon before is I don't really recommend being at peak mileage during that time when you're doing your most important marathon specific workouts. So that marathon specific phase. Mileage is actually less important then. Mileage is general training. The reason you do it is to be able to do the long, fast marathon specific stuff. Once you've acquired that ability, it becomes much more important to do a big stress and then big recovery. So often when I see people who just kind of cook up their own marathon plan, they'll do like some big long run on Saturday, and then maybe they'll do 20 miles on Saturday. Sunday they'll do 14 miles, and then Monday they'll do some tough interval workout. But I would prefer they do their big Saturday long run and do it fast, and then Sunday just go jog easy for like 8K, really short easy run. Tuesday easy, Wednesday pretty easy, maybe Thursday, Wednesday, Thursday workout. Couple more easy days, and then the next big weekend workout. So we're not crushing everything together. That gets back to that principle of the big stress and big recovery. I think people get themselves in trouble by thinking, okay, I got to be doing my hardest marathon workouts and my highest mileage and 3 workouts a week, all in that last 4 to 6 weeks of training. And then I think they just they torch themselves in training, and their race doesn't go very well. So it's a little counterintuitive that we think of mileage as so important for the marathon. And yet here I am telling you, like, those last 4 to 6 weeks, it's not about mileage. And often with the people I coach one-on-one, like, we'll really just adapt what their day-to-day mileage is coming off a workout based on how they feel. They just do whatever they feel like they need to get back to the point where they're ready to go again. And I would much rather have them go very easy, very slow, very short, if that's what it takes to recover and then be ready to go again.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a really good answer. And the long run in itself, then, how long do you recommend building up to, and how much can you increase per week? Do you have any recommendations for that?
Yeah, I think it depends on your mileage. I think in an ideal, if you were like perfectly impervious to injury, I would say like 32 to 35K or 20 to 22 miles at 90 to 95% would be great if you can get to that like 3 to 4 weeks out from the marathon. I generally add maybe 3K or 2 miles to long run distance, with the caveat being that usually in the general phase, we've gone long and easy, and then we drop down and do long and fast and then build that distance up. So it's not like we're going long and fast for distances you've never, ever, ever gone even close to before at an easy pace. The other thing I'll say, though, is I don't think you need to do a long run every single weekend. I think it's totally fine to go long every 2 weeks, sometimes even every 3 weeks if your mileage is higher. And that's another thing that as you progress through training, you can do long runs more often as long as you recover more easily afterwards. But I think it's just like 3K, maybe 4K, 2 miles, 2.5 miles seems about right. Anything more than that is a little iffy, especially if you're pushing up into territory where you've never gone that long before. It's one thing if like you're totally used to 30K long runs and then you just do, 20, 25K, 28K, and then 30K. That's fine. But if you've never gone more than 25K or 15 miles before, sometimes even just 2K further makes sense. So this is stress and recovery, right? You don't want to just throw your body into something it's not ready for. You want to start very controlled with something that's within your capabilities and then increase a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about the weekly structure? So when you have, for example, when you have 3 sessions a week in the early phase, potentially, where would you place them? And how does that then change when you have 2 sessions per week, one of them presumably being that longer, harder run, usually on the weekend? And also, what does the rest of the week look like? I mean, a lot of that is just going to be regular endurance running, but do you have, on some of the plans, I guess that there are days off running. Do you have any particular preferences around how to structure that weekly microcycle?
Yeah, I like to think about workouts as being sort of connected to what comes after them. So if you have a workout that's like very not very stressful on your body. For example, the first workout in most of the training plans is Kenyan style progression runs, starting really easy, gradually working down to a strong high end aerobic pace, maybe squeezing the pace down a little bit faster in the last 2K over 10K of running, and that's it. That workout, one easy day afterwards, you can come back and do something else, no problem. Whereas maybe you're on a low mileage plan and you do the long run, and it's the first time you've gone 15 miles easy, 25K easy. Probably take the next day off, and then you take another easy day. And then, so it's like you have the long run, then it's connected to rest day, easy day. Whereas the progression run is just connected to easy day. So that's how I think about it. And it kind of, that gets back to what I talked about earlier about switching from a relatively even distribution of intensity throughout the week to over time, you concentrate the intensity into fewer but longer and faster sessions. That's another thing. The what goes in between the workouts is also something that increases in sophistication across the plans. So when you're doing the lower mileage plans, it's basically all just easy running or 1 or 2 rest days a week. When you are at a higher mileage plan, you can do things like a little microcycle of like easy and then easy progressing to moderate, or easy with 10 by 1 minute pickups at like 10K pace and then 3 minutes easy in between. Just adding a little bit of something to that second day, and then you work out it again the next day. So that's another thing that grows as the program volume goes up.
Yeah. And speaking of that, when you say, or when you prescribe, when the plans talk about easy running, a regular, 6-mile run, 10K run that you do on the day after a workout, do you have an intensity prescription, or is it just, or what is the intensity prescription basically for the regular easy running when we don't have anything special? So let's say in the more simple plans, the breeze plan and so on.
Yeah, in the book, I actually differentiate very easy, and moderate, and have percentage guidelines for them. But those are not as strict as something like 90% of marathon pace. I think so. In the general phase, I actually use 5K pace as the basis for workouts because it's a little more connected to those physiological roots that we want to address. So I think I don't have the table in front of me, but I think like very easy is like slower than 50% of 5K pace. So if 5K pace were 4 minutes per K for you, that would be 6 minutes per K. So I'm not talking about like really, trying to ride the line on as fast as you can go on those. Easy runs, I think 65% of 5K or slower, 55 to 65%. There's actually in the science chapters of the book, there's an analysis that I present that shows that for over 90% of people, 65% of 5K pace or slower is below LT1, which kind of physiologically, that's what you're trying to do on an easy run, is stay below that first lactate threshold. So there's a nice correspondence there where the percentage guidelines actually do line up pretty well with what you're trying to accomplish physiologically. And then I believe that like moderate is more like 65 or 75% of 5K pace. So a good steady pace, but not nowhere near marathon pace.
So moderate, would that be, just as a rough estimate, it would be around LT1 or thereabout?
Yeah, about LT1, maybe a little bit faster for some people.
And where does that figure in the plans? Where is that incorporated?
So in the lower mileage plans, it's incorporated almost nowhere, or it's incorporated as a way of building on long, easy runs, and then nowhere else. But a higher mileage plan will often use a microcycle, like let's say you do some cruise interval 1200s at about LT2 pace, so 92% of 5K pace. You take one day that's just strictly an easy day, then the next day might be easy progressing to moderate, or for some of the plans that have 2 runs in the same day, easy in the morning, moderate in the afternoon. Some of the most advanced plans actually have strong, which is even, maybe halfway in between LT1 and LT2, approaching marathon pace for an occasional secondary run. again, just a touch on some faster running.
Yeah. What about the taper? How do you? This is actually one of the things that I had time to just browsing the book that I read a little bit about. I was curious about this, and so I know a little bit of what your answer is going to be, but explain for the listeners how you approach the taper for a marathon.
Yeah, I think most people taper too much and too long. I'm not a big believer in big tapers. One reason why is actually what I was saying earlier about the marathon specific phase, where we're not doing the biggest mileage and the longest runs and the fastest runs. We're in some sense, the marathon specific phase is already like composed of little mini tapers week after week, where, like I said earlier, we're doing a big workout, easy, very easy short run, easy run, another easy run, a kind of a moderate midweek workout, easy, and then another big workout. So we're kind of doing like little miniature tapers over and over. I think it's totally fine to do a like full workout like 2 weeks out from the marathon. And in fact, all the training plans have a not quite full-sized workout, but like the last like real focus session is only like 10 days out from the race. And the reason for that is I think if there's a workout that's so hard that you're not recovered 2 weeks later, like, you just shouldn't be doing that workout. I don't want to have people do a workout now where like 2 weeks from now, they're still just like not back to where they were. So if you are in that marathon specific phase and you're getting to those weekend workouts and you're able to run long and fast and feel good, like I don't think you want to drastically change things. And the reason I believe this is because I had athletes where we would be doing marathon specific workouts and be going well. And then we would do a classic, like longer, very aggressive taper, dropping mileage down a lot. And then they would feel flat on race day or just kind of lethargic or antsy, and the race wouldn't go that well. And I would look back at their workouts and be like, man, I wish we would have just done the race like 3 weeks ago when you did that 20 miler. And that's basically what I do now. I still drop volume down and intensity down to some degree, but much, much less and to a much shorter degree than I think you would see in a standard plan. Because I don't really believe in race day miracles. I just want people to get to the race, get to the starting line, feeling fresh, feeling ready to go, just like any other big weekend session. And as long as the marathon itself is not way further or way faster than what you've done before, it's, you're going to be all right. Thinking about that progression of workouts I talked about earlier of like 1K, 1K, and then 2K, 1K, and then 3K, 1K, and then 4K, 1K, you can kind of see how like the marathon itself is just like you finally remove that one like float kilometer, then you just run marathon pace the whole way through. So I don't think of the taper even as like a different thing. I just think of it as like the race is like a particularly big, long weekend session.
Yeah, it does make sense, and I think also one benefit of that is when whether you're an athlete or a coach, you know in advance that okay, like I'm not doing that big 3-week taper with massive cutting down on mileage way out from the marathon. It also, I think, maybe mentally it shifts your mindset a little bit to make sure that you don't overdo things earlier, because I think that's a risk that you can run. Speaking from experience as an athlete, at least, I've definitely done that. Where you know that you have a big taper coming up, you do like take that extra risk maybe in training that you maybe shouldn't do, and then you dig yourself a bit of a hole, and you end up spending a large part of that taper just getting out of that hole, and then you end up coming to race day and you're actually less fit than you were before. So I think that that mental aspect can also be an important reason for something like what you're saying.
Yeah. I want to think about building up to the marathon and not like, okay, we're going to do all this crazy work and then just like rest a ton and then hope that a miracle happens and we get to race day and we feel good. Yeah,
that's the other thing. Like you might maybe put a bit too much trust into that miracle or that race taper improvement, the magical taper improvement, which when what you should do is you should just make sure that you have a good progression throughout the build and that you can do those specific workouts that you then can, well, if you have a coach, the coach can tell you that, well, if you do this workout at these paces, the relative paces to your marathon pace, then you will most likely be fine on race day. So that's the benefit of having, a coach and a structured plan that they can use the experience. But even if it's something that you've done yourself before, that you did a certain workout 2 weeks out, and then how that translates into marathon pace, I guess basically it just gives you, it makes you be more systematic, I think, in your progression, and do less stupid things probably.
Yeah, and a lot of what you're doing in the marathon specific phase is practicing how you will go into the marathon. So even independent of what workout you do, the training plans have a lot of details on, okay, this workout is going to be on this, you should do it on the same kind of terrain that you're going to run your race on. So if you're training for Boston, it should have some rolling hills in it. If you're training for Chicago or Berlin, it should be flat. You should eat the dinner the night before, that something's pretty similar to what you'll have during the race. And then some of the key workouts, like make sure you do your race day fueling plan. Make sure you wear your race day shoes. And even I even want people to wear like the socks and shorts and singlet that they wear in the race, just to make sure that, there's no, you didn't forget to cut off a tag on your singlet that's going to give you a blister or something. Your socks fit with your shoes. It's a little silly to get that particular about it, but I want to minimize the number of surprises that we have on race day. And so the marathon specific phase and the marathon specific workout should be specific to your race, whatever that is, right?
Yeah. At what point do you establish your goal race pace? Is that something that you should do already when you start the training plan? Because then you can, from the start, you can basically use the percentages of marathon pace to make sure that you have a structured progression of workouts. Or do you go through more that general phase, maybe with less of a strict goal, and then you establish it as you get closer to get to that specific phase? How do you think about that?
Very much the latter category. And in fact, I prescribe workouts as percentages of 5K pace in the general phase, specifically for that reason, because so many people get locked into their goal pace. Like, I want to run 3 hours in the marathon. I got to run, 6:52.6 per mile or whatever it is. And they start doing that training 3 or 4 months before the race. They're trying to train at a level that they're not ready for. So I want people to kind of push off the decision about what your marathon pace is going to be, to the extent that you can, to at least when you get to that marathon supportive phase. And then one of the core things that is incorporated into the book and into the training plan is updates to your fitness estimate. So you look back, when you start the marathon supportive phase, you have a current fitness estimate of marathon pace. It may not be your goal pace. That's okay. But you want to monitor your workouts and then update based on, okay, I did this workout. It was supposed to be an 8 out of 10 difficulty, but it felt super easy. It was only a 7 out of 10 difficulty, and I ran faster than the pace. So I think I can increase my current fitness estimate, because that's what getting better means, is your fitness is improving. But about 3 weeks out from the marathon, I want to have that current fitness estimate converge on whatever your goal pace is, or rather, your goal pace becomes what your current fitness estimate is. There's some wiggle room, right? If your current fitness estimate is 3:01 in the marathon and you really want to run 2:59, it's fine to just kind of adjust it up or down based on what you need. But I don't want people deciding 4 months before the marathon, I'm going to run 3 hours. And so my pace, all my workouts are going to be off of 3-hour marathon pace. So I think of it as more of an incremental process, and not just you start day one, goal pace, write it on the mirror that you're going to run 6:52 per mile or whatever. Because I think another weird thing about that is I think it actually locks people into being not ambitious enough long term. Like they get so stuck on 3 hours that they don't see that they could run under 250, next year. So I want to get people in a mindset of like working where you're at and improving gradually over time, and not be so focused on this is the 3-hour training plan and we're going to do it.
So before the time when you lock in your goal pace, or your estimated pace should converge to your goal pace, when you're doing those, let's say you're 6 weeks out, you have a marathon pace workout, are you doing that based on your current estimated marathon pace?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And the way you reflect on, is my estimate a good estimate, is that you compare how difficult the workout was to the recommended difficulty. So every workout in every plan has a difficulty target. Maybe it's 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10, and an RPE basically. And so if you have your fitness estimate set at, I don't know, 320 marathon pace, and you do a workout off of that pace, and it's like a 9 out of 10, but it was supposed to be an 8 out of 10 or a 7.5 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10. Well, your fitness estimate might be too ambitious. And certainly if you're repeating over the course of like several workouts in a row, if they're all way too hard, well, your fitness estimate's too aggressive and you need to dial it back. And conversely, if you feel like you're hitting the paces and it's super easy and you almost can't help but go faster, well, that's what getting better looks like.
And how do you set your first estimated marathon pace in a plan? Are you using something like a 5K or time, or?
Yeah, the way to get a working estimate, I think, is you can kind of convert your 5K. I have some conversion factors in the book. They are a little more conservative than what you would find in like a Daniels running formula kind of table, because those conversion charts usually are based on lifetime 5K PR, lifetime marathon PR. Whereas what you want to use for like the conversion from general phase to marathon sportive phase is, okay, for right now, in theory, it's not really like what would you literally run in a marathon tomorrow, but it's like, what's a long, strong aerobic pace that you could run for at least 16, 18, 20 miles, and have it not, if you were in a race, and not be completely toast, at least by that point. So there's some, I think they span from like 80% or 78% of 5K pace up to maybe 84, 85% for a higher mileage, more experienced runner. But when you switch from general phase to marathon sportive phase, there's a little section in the book on how do you get a working estimate of your marathon pace. And one thing I emphasize there is like, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to be off by a little bit. It's okay for it to be a little slow or a little fast. You can just change it. It's fine. It's not, you're not like locked into some specific number.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the list of questions here to see which ones we should go through, especially considering we also have some listener questions. Actually, what I want to do is let's do some listener questions now, and then we see how much time we have after that to still do some more. So let's start with this one. We kind of already answered it, so we can be pretty brief here. This is LATSL80 is asking, is there a need for VO2 max training in your marathon build when you run tempo pace in the marathon itself?
Yeah, I think there's a need to increase your VO2 max during the general phase, and which is not quite the same thing as doing, I think what most people would say VO2 max training is. There's actually any speed that's above your steady state max will drive your VO2 to VO2 max. So it's not like there's this singular magical velocity at VO2 max that you must run to improve your VO2 max. You can do 8K pace, 10K pace, 5K pace, or faster. But the short answer is yes, and that's a general component to fitness because it is relatively far from the marathon in terms of speed. And much like everything else, you progress from general to more specific. So definitely early on in training, and then less so or not at all in the later phases of training.
And the next question is from Sam Barley. Shout out Sam, a friend of the show and friend of me. Should runners focus more on heat training considering this year's hot races? I'm not actually sure. I haven't followed the marathon majors and the big marathon races. Have they all been hot this year?
Berlin was hot. London was relatively hot. It's not a major, but my hometown race, Twin Cities, this marathon this weekend is going to be hot. I think there's a whole chapter on heat training in the book. It's in the advanced training technique section, but it covers all the latest research on heat adaptation and how to do it and how long it lasts and all that. The short answer is, if you think there's a decent chance you'll be facing hot conditions on race day, I would definitely do heat training and make sure you're adapted for it. What I do is I look at the historical weather data and I look at how common is it to have a race that's hotter than maybe 12C, that I would consider the upper range of like call it optimal temperature for marathon. I also have on my website on Running Runningus, I have a heat like a heat adjusted pace calculator, which provides kind of a best estimate for what you could aspire to. Obviously, if you're not heat adapted or if you handle heat very poorly, it could go much worse than this. But you can plug in, okay, here's what the heat and humidity are going to be, and here's what a race pace adjustment might look like. So in short, yeah, the good news is it's still unclear whether training in the heat helps at all if you aren't racing in the heat. But at the very least, it doesn't seem to be worse than doing your training in cool conditions. So if you think there's some chance you will face hot conditions, then I would definitely do heat training.
So this leads to some follow-up questions from me then. First of all, how should you do heat training? Secondly, I'll ask both of the questions here and let you riff. It's quite funny when you say that. I of course agree that like something like 12C is the ideal running conditions, but when like if that means that anything above 12C or at least like a fair bit above, like, let's say 15 plus, then is hot, then you have a lot of races that are basically almost, you have a high chance of having that weather, which is, from a triathlon perspective, that's interesting because we race more in the summer, wherever it's summer in where the races are held. So we see heat as something that is maybe more like 25C plus, and something that is 20 is more of a moderate. But again, like you said, optimal running conditions when you want to have your fastest possible time, it's going to be somewhere closer to that 12C or 10C or something like that. Anyway, so the two questions are how to go about heat training, and secondly, if you consider also maybe those more like moderate heats, but they are still not optimal, as something that requires heat training, does that also reduce the severity of the heat training you need to do? For example, if you habitually train in 20 degrees Celsius where you live, and is that enough to get the effect that you want to do a marathon where it's likely to be between 15 and 20, or how do you view that?
Yeah, I think with heat training being so popular now, I think honestly most people probably overdo it. They probably go too hot, too hard. To get the stimulus for heat adaptation from your body, you only need two things. You need to, number one, sweat significantly, and you need to, number two, have your core temperature go above what it would normally be in like ideal cool conditions. And that's not that hard to do. You can do that with, 24C or so, 22C, or like 20C, but you're wearing like a thermal shirt and compression shorts. You don't need to be out there, and you shouldn't be out there like in a parka and a winter hat, like some of the stuff you see, on social media. There isn't. This is like mileage, right? Like people think like, oh, more is just always better. Like, no, you want to be prepared for the specific demands of the conditions you'll be facing. Now, if you were running at the World Championships in Tokyo this summer, and it was incredibly hot and incredibly humid, yeah, that's one thing. But if you're like, oh, it might be 20C at Berlin, that's something else. So, roughly, you need about 2 weeks of 5 exposures to heat per week, each of which is about an hour to get fully adapted to heat. You can do it longer with less frequent. So you can do it like for, 3 or 4 weeks, only exposing yourself to heat 3 times in a week. And again, you just need to be sweating to a significant degree and feeling somewhat hot. You don't need to be on the verge of passing out. You don't need to be like, losing insane amounts of your body weight in sweat. Most people's intuition, not knowing anything about it, is going to be to overdo it. And again, there's very specific details about like exactly how long and all that in the book.
I think it's also the research that leads to that, because the research is done in labs, in controlled, either in heat chambers, or some of the research now is done in a regular room but with heat suits and stuff. So it all is kind of, that extreme end of the spectrum. But I think, from my experience as well, what you're saying makes absolute sense. I do think that a lot of people are at risk of overdoing things.
Yeah, and one thing to understand about the science is that two things is people design, including me when I was in graduate school, people design scientific studies to like find as big of a difference as they can, because you're working with relatively small sample sizes. And so you're not going to compare like 15C versus 20C. You're going to compare like 8 versus 25 and super humid, right? You're going to crank that difference as big as you can to get the numbers to show up in your sample of 20 or 30 people.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is to keep in mind is that the research studies do core temperature measurements, and so they know how hard they can push it before they stop people. And if you read the studies, they will often say, we started with 20 people and we stopped 2 of them early because their core temperature got above this safety threshold. You out in the real world, you don't have a core temperature sensor inside your body telling you when you're above a safe threshold. So you don't want to be way out on that super aggressive edge. You want to be nice in the middle, in that safe zone, like sweating, feeling kind of hot, but not not like you're in a heat suit in the sauna.
The next question is from DJ Bayir, who asks, does running require more calcium in one's diet versus cycling? So I assume that he's referring here to the impact on things like bone density, bone health.
Yeah, that's a good question. Off the top of my head, I don't know. I'm not super up to date on the like micronutrient requirements. I do know there is some interesting research on bone metabolism and bone strength in runners versus cyclists versus people who do other activities. There's actually some evidence that the cyclists people who only cycle have lower bone structural integrity than runners, but runners have lower bone structural integrity than people who play volleyball or basketball or something where there's a lot of like dynamic loading. I don't know exactly what the state of the research is on calcium and like calcium supplementation today. There was an old study of Navy recruits that found some difference in stress fracture risk, but I don't know if that's replicated or not. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I also don't know. I do think that there's maybe some of the more recent science in bone health and in runners has been around carbohydrate availability and the importance of carbohydrates. So
yes, yeah, and that actually does that I do know some about, and it is there seems to be an interaction between a lack of not just energy availability generally, but specifically, like you said, carbohydrate availability, which a lot of people don't understand this like availability idea, which is the following: like you can eat the right number of calories, but if you distribute them in the day like poorly, you can put your body in a negative state for a significant chunk of the day, and that's not so good. So for most people, that's like they get up, they do their workout, they skip breakfast, they have a light lunch, and then they finally eat dinner after they get home from work. But you just spent the whole day in a state of low energy availability, even if your total caloric intake equals your total caloric expenditure.
Yeah. The next question is from Brittany Wills, who asks, these are all Instagram handles, so that's why they don't make any sense. Well, I think we've answered this one. Long runs, all easy or with a good amount of marathon pace in there, like 15 to 80K over 30K long run. So,
yeah, I think you need to run long and fast if you want to succeed in the marathon. One thing, like I said earlier about starting from speed, I think it's much easier to start from like 8 or 10 miles at marathon pace, like on its own, not with a bunch of other easy running connected to it, and then make that longer, as opposed to I'm going to take my 32K run and then I'm going to do 3K at marathon pace and then 5 and then 8 and then 10. It's much harder to start from something that's already really long and add intensity on top of it. It's much easier actually to start from something short and intense and then make it longer.
Yeah. The final question that we'll take here from the listeners is from Dylan. Dylan is a great marathoner himself, by the way, Olympic trials qualifier in the United States. He asks, I'm going to shorten it a little bit. Actually, I'm not, because you'll probably be faster for me to just read it. I often hear LT1 linked to marathon pace, but is there a time-based limit associated with LT1 like there is with LT2, where the classic definition is about 1 hour of sustainable effort? In other words, is LT1 typically tied to a certain maximum duration or continuous running at a specified intensity? Or is it more open-ended? Also, how does LT1 relate to marathon pace for different ability levels? For example, would LT1 fall faster or slower than marathon pace for a 4-hour marathoner versus a 2:15 marathoner?
Okay, there's a lot in there, but I will.
Yeah.
I actually want to push back a little bit against the notion that LT2 is connected to a specific duration. It happens to be the case that for long distance runners who run 10K half marathon, there's a pretty good correlation between lab assessed LT2 pace and what they can run for like 45 to 60 or 70 minutes. That doesn't mean that the definition of LT2 or the definition of what LT2 is trying to measure, which is that maximum steady state, is 1 hour race pace. As an example, I coach an 800 meter runner in Mexico, and I have a very good idea of what his maximum steady state is. There is no way he could hold that for 1 hour or even 45 minutes. What determines LT2 and its underlying construct, that steady state max, is what's the highest intensity you can maintain at a metabolic steady state. That's it. Now, for some people, it happens to be roughly 60, 70 minute race pace. But the same is true for LT1. LT1 is not connected to a specific duration. LT1 is the point at which blood lactate levels start to rise above their baseline, and the point at which something called the VO2 slow component starts to appear. It basically means your oxygen consumption gradually drifts higher over 5 to 10 minutes of continuous running. And both of those physiological changes are coming from the same underlying phenomenon, which is your body starts losing efficiency in slow twitch fibers, and it starts recruiting fast twitch fibers to pitch in. So there's really interesting research on where is LT1 as a percentage of VO2 max in people of very different ability levels. And what you see is like completely sedentary people, it's actually relatively high as a percentage of VO2 max because their VO2 max is just so low. And then as people get in better shape, it goes down. And then when people get really fit, what happens is basically like they compress. If you think about the full range of 0 to 100% of VO2 max, as you get more fit, you start compressing that upper range of heavy and metabolically unsustainable paces. But for the marathon, I don't think LT1 is as important. I think it's more important for ultra distance events because its main effects are basically metabolic. It has a lot to do with when your body starts relying on carbohydrates for a bigger energy source. If you're racing 100K, that matters a lot. If you're racing the marathon and you have a good fueling plan, not so much. But it is the case that for slower marathoners or for not very fit marathoners, they may be running the marathon below LT1, but a good, well-trained marathoner should be well above LT1 for the marathon.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I'm just checking if there's any part of the question that we didn't really answer.
I think I got everything. Hopefully.
Yeah, well, I think, you did you say about the duration? Well, you obviously said that LT2 is not tied to a duration, and that's true for LT. That's true for LT1 as well. And I would say that there's a much bigger disparity between like the variance in how long somebody can hold their LT1 is huge, and even in percentage terms compared to LT2, I would argue it's a lot bigger. Like some of the best Ironman athletes would be amazing at holding LT1 for a very, very long time. Compared to somebody like the best half marathoners in the world, or even compared to the best marathoners, even though the best marathoners would be very good at it as well.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. Maybe another way to get intuitions on that is like take somebody who's doing a couch to 5K program. Like they have an LT1, it will show up in a test in the lab, but they wouldn't even be able to hold it for 90 minutes if they're truly they're just trying to get to run 5K continuously.
Yeah,
so
but
clearly,
sometimes it wouldn't show up in a test. Depends on how you define it. But if you want to have that first baseline, like a lactate baseline to establish LT1, then you could easily have cases where it doesn't show up for.
Yeah, where like basically any form of exercise is above LT1.
Yeah,
in some sense by the lab definition. Yeah.
Okay, let's see here which questions we finish off with. So I wrote this a bit in jest, something fun for the algorithms, because you need to have something for them as well. So can you explain and give your thoughts on double threshold training and special block training?
Yeah, they are. So one more pitch. There are specific chapters on both of those in the book, in the advanced training section. They are really interesting training interventions because they look really similar. They both involve a workout in the morning and a workout in the afternoon. But the underlying logic is almost like completely different. So double threshold basically is a solution to the question of how can I distribute high-end aerobic training close to LT2 within a week as efficiently as possible so I can maximize my total weekly load in a highly repeatable way. So like Marius Bakken and the Ingebrigtsens in running, basically they've converged on this solution of, okay, a threshold workout in the morning, a threshold workout in the afternoon, an easy day, another double threshold day, and then some other like X factor workouts. And then you repeat that just week after week after week after week. It's very much about like high overall training load on a consistent basis. The special block, which comes from Renato Canova, is much more about the idea of supercompensation, stress and recovery. So it takes that idea that I talked about earlier of big stress and big recovery and just cranks it up to the maximum. Like, what's the biggest stress we can do? And then the biggest recovery afterwards. So when you look at what some of his top athletes will do, they will do like 50K of work total in a day, split between a morning and an afternoon session. So maybe, 30K in the morning and 20K in the afternoon, all of it within 10% of marathon pace. And then they'll take like 3 or 4 or 5 days of very easy training afterwards. So it's a huge stress and then a huge recovery afterwards. So it's very much the opposite idea of I'm going to like have this super consistent training load day to day, week to week, month to month. So it's more like race specific. Actually, the reason why the special block is called special is that in the Italian terminology, special is what they call supportive training. So basically it means the special block is going to be between 90 and 110% of whatever race pace you're training for. So marathon pace if you're doing marathon training. So I think a lot of people like don't quite understand the difference between the two because they look so similar, right? Morning workout, afternoon workout. And it's this extreme training technique that elite runners use. But they are like philosophically, they're completely different.
Yeah, that's a good explanation. And are any of these, do they figure in, your general plans that you have in your book at any level? Or is this more something that is really for specific runners where you have individual supervision, basically you coach them individually? And for whom would you recommend doing something like this? And for whom would you not recommend doing it?
The double threshold approach appears in the hurricane plan and maybe briefly in the tornado plan. So the two highest volume plans. These are basically for people doing 160K a week or more. And the hurricane plan has one special block in it, and it's optional. There's like a single workout version of it. So what I would recommend if people want to try these concepts is don't try to replicate. Okay, I'm going to do exactly what Emil Caress's workout was before the Paris Olympics. Understand the principle. Understand the idea behind where the double threshold session comes from. Understand the idea behind where the special block comes from. So you don't do 50K of marathon specific work in a day. If maybe typically you can do, 16K, maybe you can do a really big day of like 20 or 22 and then take really big recovery after that. For double threshold, instead of like, okay, I'm going to do 10K of threshold work in the morning, 10K in the afternoon, we're going to do that Monday and Wednesday, maybe just try a 50% increase or a 30% increase in the typical volume of threshold work that you do. And maybe don't even split it into 2 sessions. Maybe do a technique I've used recently is I've been calling it a double single threshold, where it's like maybe Monday and Wednesday, you both do relatively high 8 to 10K volume threshold sessions, easy day in between. And you kind of treat that like it was a double threshold block, in that it's an extra dose, a larger dose of threshold training. And then you recover afterwards, see how that goes.
Yeah. What's quite interesting with the double threshold is that for triathletes, it's something that is quite easily achievable because you do it. One of them is, you never do 2 runs really as a triathlete, and at least not as amateur triathletes, but you would do a swim and a run, or a swim and a bike, or even a bike and a run. And you end up seeing, at least in my experience, that it's not so much about you having to be super fit, having to have a great VO2 max, like being a sub 9-hour Ironman or anything like that. But metabolically, it's quite doable to do a double threshold. Special block, again, completely different. So that's a different discussion. But I think with running, the hard thing there is having built up the tissue resilience and knowing that you won't get hurt by doing that amount of intensity in a shorter window. So that's something that I would be a bit more careful with if you're experimenting with that, and just like gradually build up the volumes that you're doing.
Yeah, and I wouldn't do a double threshold until you're very comfortable doing just double easy runs on a regular basis. And I wouldn't even think about doing double threshold unless somebody's doing 110K a week or more. And even then, you don't really have to until you get to quite high volume.
One thing that I have done personally, this is not so much for specific marathon training or anything, but in the running context, is to do a double threshold where the first run is on the track, so it's a classic flat threshold run, but the second one is in the evening on a 15% grade on the treadmill, and so then you limit that impact, but you can still get up to the same heart rate and lactate that you would want in a double threshold. So that's been quite an interesting way of doing it when you want to do a double run threshold, but are a bit scared of the injury risk.
Yeah, and do you control that with like heart rate or lactate testing to get the?
I have had lactate testing as the foundation for that, but not testing in workout, but just using heart rate then to guide that intent. Heart rate and phase, because when you have done when it's on the treadmill, the same treadmill, and you've done the ramp test, you know roughly what phase corresponds to altitude, and then just do fine adjustments based on heart rate and RPE on the day. All right. Well, let's do a final question here. A question that I've started introducing a little bit, even though I'm forgetting it in many episodes. Not related to sports performance or training or anything like that, but if you can give one sport-related recommendation and one non-sport-related recommendation for people, for what people should do if they visit the Twin Cities, or you can use your entire state. Is it Michigan? I'm not.
Minnesota.
Minnesota. Okay. Midwest anyway. So yeah, what would your tourist recommendations from a sporty and non-sporty perspective be?
Okay, well, sport, I would definitely recommend going for a run along the Mississippi River. So Minneapolis is right on the Mississippi, huge, gigantic river that runs the whole length of the United States. And we have a fantastic bike and pedestrian infrastructure on both sides of it. You can do miles and miles and miles of walking, running, cycling along the river. And then my non-sport recommendation is actually also on the river. We have a really fantastic bridge called the Stone Arch Bridge that goes from downtown, right next to this very famous theater, across to the other side. And they just finished renovating it this year. It's 160 years old, I think, pedestrian only. So you can walk out on the bridge and get like nice photos of downtown and look down over the it's called St. Anthony Falls. There's like a waterfall below it, and you can even run on that route if you're doing a run. So you can walk out there, take photos, or go for a run on it. Those
Brilliant.
are my two Minneapolis recommendations.
Brilliant. Yeah, that sounds great. And I'll put all the links to the book in the show notes. But I guess one more time for people so they remember, what is the name of the book?
Marathon Excellence for Everyone. Check it out. It's on Amazon or marathonexcellence.com.
All right. Thank you so much, John. It was great to have you on, and hopefully the listeners are now well prepared for their fall marathons and even winter marathons if they're starting to train for that.
Thank you. Great to be back.